They won't attack you with fists. They'll use guilt. They won't silence you with force. They'll do it with shame. This is how power really works: quiet, calculated, and emotional. Your kindness becomes a weapon. Your loyalty becomes a leash. The more you give, the more they take, until your support is no longer appreciated but expected. If you're emotionally open, you're the perfect target. Not because you're weak, but because you haven't yet learned to be cold-blooded. Not cruel, but clear. Not heartless, but immune to guilt. That kind of strength doesn't come from the heart, it comes from the mind. In this video, we'll expose 5 manipulative tactics that twist your generosity into submission, subtle moves like guilt trips, loyalty traps, and just this once lies. You'll learn how to shut them down using Stoic clarity and Machiavellian precision. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. But if you don't guard it, someone else will." If you're tired of being used, hit like, subscribe, and let's begin.
Number 1.
The entitlement shift. It begins with gratitude. In the early stages, every act of kindness you offer, every ride, every favor, every emotional check-in is met with thanks. You're appreciated, you're praised, you're made to feel like your presence is a blessing. But slowly and visibly, the tone changes. The gratitude fades, the praise stops, and without warning, your giving is no longer special. It's expected. What used to be a thank you becomes, of course. What used to be a favor becomes your role. And the moment you pause, the moment you set a limit, they don't ask if something's wrong. They don't wonder if you're tired. They call you selfish, distant, cold. They say you've changed, and in their eyes you have, because you're no longer bending. This is the entitlement shift. It is one of the subtlest forms of control. It doesn't scream, it doesn't argue. It just creeps in, reshaping the emotional contract between you and them. Without your consent, what they once saw as generosity, they now frame as obligation. And that shift in perception is exactly how your peace starts to erode. You begin to feel guilt not for doing something wrong, but for simply needing space. The Stoics warned us about this. Marcus Aurelius, a man constantly surrounded by people demanding his time and energy, once wrote, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. If you think your worth is proven through endless sacrifice, then your mind is no longer your own. It belongs to the approval of others, and that's exactly where the entitlement shift wants to keep you, serving, doubting, and afraid to disappoint." Here's what makes this tactic especially dangerous. It rewards your silence. The less you speak your needs, the more they take. The more you endure, the less they appreciate, because your predictability becomes their advantage. They know you'll say yes. They know you'll come through, so they stop asking. And if you ever do hesitate, even briefly, their reaction exposes the truth. They weren't grateful, they were dependent. Let's look at a real-world example. Oprah Winfrey, a woman of vast generosity, both financially and emotionally. But with that generosity came a lesson. Some people began to expect her help, not hope for it. She once said, "Lots of people want to ride with you in the limo, but what you want is someone who will take the bus with you when the limo breaks down." And the painful realization she faced was this: the more she gave, the more some stopped seeing her as a person and started seeing her as a resource. Now let's shift to philosophy. Seneca, in one of his letters, emphasized that he who receives a benefit with gratitude repays the first installment on his debt. But in a world of entitlement, that repayment never comes. You help, they nod. You give, they shrug. And eventually the relationship begins to feel like emotional theft, because it is. But what can you do? You learn to observe the shift, not just in words, but in energy. When your help becomes a requirement, when your absence is punished, When your boundaries are questioned instead of respected, you're no longer in a relationship. You're in a system of extraction. And this is where Stoicism becomes your shield, Epictetus said. It's not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. You must stop judging your withdrawal as cruelty. You must stop interpreting their disappointment as your failure. The truth is, disappointment only exists when expectation replaces appreciation, and that's not on you. You also need to notice the disguise. This shift rarely comes from enemies. It often comes from those closest to you. Family, partners, longtime friends. They don't raise their voice. They raise their demands, and when you finally stop giving, they frame it as betrayal. But what they really mean is, you've stopped being easy to use. Let's take another example. Michelle Obama, as First Lady, she was deeply committed to public service and emotional connection. But she often spoke about how difficult it was to navigate spaces where her value was measured by how much she gave, not who she was. In her memoir, Becoming, she wrote, "I had to finally accept that my voice, my boundaries, and my rest mattered. Not because others said so, but because I decided they did." That's the Stoic realization. You do not owe your energy to people who treat it like air, constantly consumed, never acknowledged. So how do you apply this? First, detach your identity from being the rescuer. You are not less valuable because you set limits. You are not less kind because you enforce them. A Stoic does not give from guilt. He gives from strength. He says yes without fear and no without guilt. Second, notice patterns, not apologies. People who feel entitled to you will apologize only when it serves them, but their pattern tells you everything. Do they still express gratitude? Do they check in without asking for something? Do they honor your space even when it's inconvenient for them? If not, the entitlement shift is already in play. Third, reclaim your power by understanding this. When you stop giving freely, you'll finally see who was there for you, and who was there for what you could do. As Marcus Aurelius said, look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if thou wilt ever dig. That digging, the inner work, is how you uncover your strength, not from pleasing others, but from freeing yourself. In the end, the entitlement shift only controls those who seek validation through self-sacrifice. The Stoic path is not about becoming cold, it's about becoming clear. Clear enough to see when you're being drained, clear enough to stop it, and clear enough to walk away without explanation. You are not cruel for protecting your energy. You are not distant for choosing your peace. You are not selfish for saying enough. You are awake. And from this place of clarity, you give, not because you must, but because you choose to. Not because you're expected, but because you are sovereign.
Number 2.
The guilt reflex. They don't need to raise their voice to control you. They just need to say one thing. After all I've done for you, and suddenly you're not standing on your own 2 feet. You're buried under the weight of unspoken debt. This is the guilt reflex. It's not a direct attack. It's not even a request. It's an emotional manipulation that makes you feel like drawing a boundary is the same as betrayal. It often begins after you've given, sacrificed, and stretched yourself for someone else. You think your actions are coming from love, and maybe they were. But what you didn't see, what you couldn't see, is that every time you gave, they were keeping score, not out of fairness, but out of leverage. The guilt reflex turns your kindness into ammunition. When you finally assert yourself, when you say, I can't, or that's too much, or simply not today, they don't argue with the request, they question your character. Really? After everything I've done for you? That one line activates a deep instinct in people who care. The fear of being ungrateful, the fear of being seen as unloving, or worse, disloyal. But here's the truth the Stoics understood. Guilt is only effective when you're unclear about your own values. When you don't have a defined line, a firm sense of self, or a clear understanding of your responsibilities, others will define them for you. And those definitions are always shaped in their favor. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are pained by external things, it is not they that disturb you, but your own judgment of them, and it is in your power to wipe out that judgment now." This is where the guilt reflex lives, not in reality, but in your judgment of yourself. You believe you owe them. You believe you're wrong for needing space, and they know that. Let's be honest, guilt is one of the most powerful emotional weapons, not because it's loud, but because it's quiet. It makes you police yourself. It makes you hand over your time, your peace, even your dignity, just to avoid the feeling of letting someone down. But here's what the manipulator won't say. Guilt doesn't mean you've done something wrong. It just means someone doesn't like your boundary, and that's not your problem to fix. Let's look at a real example. Taylor Swift, a woman with enormous fame, pressure, and emotional scrutiny, has spoken openly about how guilt nearly ruined her mental health. In a documentary, she described how people would say she was too calculated or too distant the moment she stopped being available to everyone. The message was clear. If she didn't give endlessly, she was cold. But she learned that guilt is often a sign that you're doing something right for yourself. Even if it disappoints others, she said, you don't owe anyone access to you just because they've had it before. That's Stoic clarity in modern form. This guilt reflex shows up in all kinds of relationships, especially with people who've helped you in the past. They remind you of their sacrifices, their favors, their patience. They recite a list of everything they've done, not to reflect, but to collect. But here's the key distinction. Someone who gave from love never demands repayment. Only those who gave with strings attached keep score. And this is where the Stoic separates emotional truth from illusion. Seneca wrote, "A gift consists not in what is done or given, but in the intention of the giver." If their help was truly a gift, there would be no guilt. But if their help was a disguised investment, then the guilt was always part of the plan. When you feel guilt rising, pause. Don't react, observe, ask yourself, what are they really saying? Is this guilt rooted in a real wrong, or just in their discomfort with your boundary? Are they upset because you failed them, or because you've stopped being easy to control? And here's something people rarely talk about. Guilt doesn't just keep you in bad relationships, it shapes your identity. You start believing you're a bad person for being tired, for needing space, for choosing yourself. But as Epictetus taught, no man is free who is not master of himself. You cannot master yourself if you're constantly adjusting your truth to please others. Let's look at another example. Jim Carrey, known for his humor, his energy, his giving nature. But behind the mask, he wrestled with deep guilt. Guilt for not always being on. Guilt for not meeting the expectations others placed on him. In interviews, he revealed that his healing began the moment he stopped trying to be who everyone wanted and started saying no, unapologetically. Your need to be accepted, he said, can make you invisible in this world. That's the cost of the guilt reflex. Invisibility. So how do you respond? You recognize that your boundary is not cruelty, it's clarity. You stop explaining your every move to people who weaponize your compassion. You remind yourself that your life is not a debt to be paid back, but a flame to be protected. Guilt only works when you believe their disappointment is your failure. But the Stoic doesn't fear disappointment. The Stoic fears self-betrayal. Saying no is not an act of aggression. It's an act of self-respect. And the moment you stop flinching at their disapproval is the moment you reclaim your freedom. Because real love does not require guilt. Real connection does not come with terms. And real peace cannot exist when your boundaries are on trial. You are not here to be someone's emotional accountant. You are not a vessel for other people's expectations. You are a sovereign being. You think, you feel, you choose. And that's what Stoicism gives you. Not coldness, but control. Not detachment, but discernment. Not isolation, but inner freedom. So the next time someone says, "After all I've done for you," look them in the eyes and remember, your worth is not measured by how small you stay to keep others comfortable. Your worth is not up for negotiation, and your guilt is not proof of wrongdoing. It's proof that you're waking up, and that awakening is unstoppable.
Number 3.
The loyalty loop. Loyalty is a beautiful thing until it becomes a trap. At first, it feels noble. You show up for people, you stay consistent, you forgive mistakes. You're the one they can count on when everyone else disappears. But eventually, the same loyalty that made you valuable becomes the reason they stop valuing you. This is the loyalty loop. It works like this. The more you prove yourself loyal, the less they feel the need to reciprocate. They know you'll stay. They know you'll forgive. They know you'll keep giving even when they stop trying. And so, they stop showing up fully. They start treating your loyalty like a guarantee. And that's when it turns from something sacred into something strategic, used not to connect with you, but to control you. The Stoics saw this dynamic clearly, Marcus Aurelius warned. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. But what if the enemy doesn't come with cruelty, but with comfort? What if the real threat is not betrayal, but slow erosion? Your loyalty gets looped into a cycle. Give, wait, forgive, repeat. And every time you hope for more, you get less, until you stop hoping and just accept. That is the trap. You believe loyalty means endurance, that sticking it out, even through neglect, disrespect, or one-sided effort, is a sign of strength. But in reality, it becomes self-abandonment. You keep choosing them over you. You keep rationalizing why they forgot, why they changed, why they didn't come through. And before long, your loyalty is no longer about connection. It's about habit. And habit is not love. The Stoic response is simple, but not easy. Don't let your principles become your prison. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." And bravery here doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it means walking away from someone you once defended. Someone who now only calls when it benefits them, who only loves you on their timeline, and who treats your devotion as background noise. Let's look at a real example. Maya Angelou, a woman whose life was full of complex relationships, some of them deeply supportive, others emotionally draining. She once said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." That was not a cynical statement. It was stoic. It was a call to clarity, because loyalty without observation is blindness. And over time, that blindness becomes suffering. The loyalty loop plays a cruel trick on your identity. It convinces you that being the constant makes you strong, that being the one who stays is noble, and in many cases, it is. But only when it's mutual, only when it's seen, only when the relationship respects your presence instead of just relying on it. And here's where it gets dangerous. The longer you stay in the loop, the more invisible your effort becomes. They don't see what you're giving up. They don't notice the time you carve out, the energy you spend, the peace you lose, because you've always done it, and what's always there becomes taken for granted. The Stoics would call this a failure of perception, not just theirs, but yours. Epictetus taught that freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And here's what lies beyond your control: their appreciation, their reciprocity, their loyalty. You cannot force them to rise to your level. You can only choose to stop sinking to theirs. Now consider a modern example, Keanu Reeves. He's become widely admired not just for his talent, but for his boundaries. Known for his loyalty to close friends, his generosity to crew members, and his compassion in quiet ways. He remains reserved with his inner circle. Why? Because even loyalty must have a filter. In interviews, he shared how past betrayals didn't make him bitter, but made him clear. Sometimes you have to let people go, he said, not because you don't care, but because they don't. That is the mature form of Stoic detachment, not shutting down, but wising up. In the loyalty loop, they rely on your history. They'll remind you of how long you've known each other, what you've been through, the old memories, and it all sounds warm, nostalgic, until you realize that history is being used to excuse the present. And if the present is full of neglect, that history is just a cage made of gold. So how do you break the loop? First, recognize that loyalty is not measured by how long you stay, but by how honestly you show up. If you're showing up to be dismissed, ignored, or drained, that's not loyalty, that's martyrdom. And Stoicism is not about self-sacrifice, it's about self-stewardship. Second, stop mistaking consistency for connection. Just because you've always been there doesn't mean you still belong there. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Apply that urgency to your relationships. If you knew this month was your last, would you spend it proving your worth to someone who no longer sees it? Third, practice what I call quiet extraction. You don't need a fight. You don't need a speech. You don't need them to understand. Just stop over giving, stop over explaining, start observing. And when you see that your presence is no longer treated as a gift, withdraw it, not out of anger, but out of respect for your own soul. And this is what the loyalty loop hates most, your silence. Because it can't argue with silence, it can't manipulate it, it can't guilt it. Silence is the Stoic sword. It cuts through drama, it reveals truth, and it ends loops. You are not cold for stepping back. You are not heartless for no longer chasing. You are not disloyal for refusing to beg someone to value what they keep using for free. You are simply free. And freedom, the Stoics knew, was not found in being liked, but in living without shame, without self-erasure, without bending yourself in half to hold someone else together. So the next time your loyalty is taken for granted, don't raise your voice. Raise your standards. And remember, true loyalty is never one-sided. It's not proven by staying forever. It's proven by knowing when to go.
Number 4.
The just this once ploy. It sounds innocent, harmless, even reasonable. Just this once, they say. Can you stay late? Can you lend it again? Can you forgive me? Just this once? And because you're generous, because you care, you say yes, after all. What's one time? But what you don't realize in that moment is that you've just stepped into a pattern. One built not on chaos, but calculation. This is the just this once ploy. It's not a demand, it's a test. A soft push to see how far you'll bend. And once you do, even slightly, the boundaries you thought were clear become negotiable. The line you drew in the sand, it fades with the next tide. And before long, just this once becomes twice, then weekly, then always. The Stoics warned against this kind of erosion, Marcus Aurelius wrote. Pay attention to what you're giving your energy to. Where attention goes, life follows. When you give away your boundaries in small pieces, under the illusion of grace, you end up building a life of quiet resentment, not because you were tricked, but because you failed to protect your edge. Here's the truth. Most people don't cross your boundaries all at once. They inch over them, slowly, gently, smiling. They don't ask for the world. They ask for a favor. And because you don't want to seem rigid, unkind, or distant, you give in. You tell yourself you're being flexible, but flexibility without clarity becomes self-betrayal. It's not the big betrayals that break you. It's the small ones you agreed to. The phone call you didn't want to take. The yes you didn't mean. The silence you gave when your whole body screamed no. And each time you choose peace over truth, you teach them something dangerous. That your limits are suggestions, not standards. Let's consider a real-world example. Jennifer Aniston. For years, she spoke about the emotional toll of being portrayed a certain way. Overly accommodating, always the girl next door, always saying yes. In interviews, she shared how she had to break that image, not for the media, but for herself. She said, "I had to learn that no is a full sentence. You don't owe people your peace just to keep things smooth." That's Stoicism in action, not about shutting people out, but about honoring what's within. The just this once ploy is powerful because it wears the mask of reason. It never shows up as manipulation. It appears as friendship, as love, as a small exception. But exceptions become precedents, and precedents become patterns. And eventually, your life is no longer shaped by your will, but by what others can convince you to make room for. Seneca put it clearly, associate with those who will make a better man of you, welcome those whom you yourself can improve. But notice what's missing. He never said, adapt endlessly for those who take. The Stoic path is about right proportion, right balance, not self-erasure. So how do you spot the ploy? You feel it, not in your mind, but in your body. That slight hesitation, that inner tug, that quiet voice that says, this isn't fair, but I don't want to cause conflict. And that's the moment. That's when the test happens. Not when they ask, but when you silence your truth to keep the peace. And here's the irony. Every time you say just this once, you're hoping they'll remember your kindness. That next time, they'll respect you more. But often the opposite happens. Your leniency becomes their leverage, and the standard gets reset, not by you, but by your silence. Let's take another example. Ed Sheeran, globally adored, constantly touring, giving and giving, but in recent years he admitted that saying yes to everyone almost broke him. I was on autopilot, he said. I was giving too much of myself away. Eventually he disappeared from public life. Not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. That withdrawal wasn't avoidance. It was Stoic recalibration, because you cannot serve truthfully from an empty vessel. Epictetus taught that no person is free who is not master of themselves. And that includes mastering the urge to be agreeable, to be liked, to be seen as nice, because nice is not the same as good. And kindness without clarity leads to chaos. So what do? First, understand that firmness is not cruelty. Saying no does not make you a bad friend, partner, or human. It makes you honest. And honesty is the foundation of any real connection. If someone can only love you when you're easy, agreeable, and self-sacrificing, that's not love, that's convenience. Second, watch for the emotional aftermath. If every small yes leaves you feeling drained, tight-chested, or irritated, that's not generosity. That's coercion wearing politeness. And if someone only responds well when you bend, then you're not in a relationship, you're in a role. Third, practice what the Stoics called prohairesis, your inner capacity to choose, to will, to stand. It's your moral character. It's what can't be taken, only surrendered. Every time you say no to something that erodes your peace, you strengthen your prohairesis. You become more yourself, not colder, but clearer. And here's what most people won't tell you. Once you stop saying just this once, people will react. Some with confusion, some with guilt trips, some with silence. That's okay. Their discomfort is not your cruelty. It's their surprise that you're no longer easy to sway. But you're not here to be swayed. You're here to be still, to be firm, to be a force. Because peace is not found in pleasing everyone. Peace is found in pleasing your soul. You are not unkind for needing boundaries. You are not harsh for sticking to them. You are not cold for no longer performing emotional flexibility for people who never do the same. You are simply aligned. So the next time someone says, just this once, take a breath, look them in the eyes and respond. Not with anger, not with explanation, but with quiet clarity. No, not this once, not again. Because you've learned that every time you betray yourself to serve the moment, you create a future you resent. And every time you stand in your truth, no matter how small, you build a future you can respect. That is Stoicism, not cold, not distant, but unwavering. And in a world of bending, your stillness becomes your power. They'll call you cold when you stop being easy. They'll say you've changed when you stop giving on demand. They'll call you harsh, selfish, or distant, but only because your clarity no longer benefits them. But remember this, Stoicism isn't about shutting down, it's about waking up. You don't become hard, you become sharp, not for revenge, but for peace. Not to control others, but to finally reclaim control over yourself. So take what you've learned here and protect it, guard your boundaries, honor your silence, and never explain your strength to those who never respected your softness. If this message spoke to you, like the video, subscribe to the channel and carry this clarity into every decision you make, because your power begins the moment you stop apologizing for having it. And if they say, you're too much now, just smile. You're finally just enough for yourself.